Today you are going to hear the story of Layla Al-Sayeed, a young woman of only 25 years old, daughter of a respected imam in London, raised to be the guardian of her family's honor. Since childhood, she learned to silence her own voice and to live under the weight of fear, as if every misstep were a sentence. She lived under the strictest Muslim laws. On the outside, everyone saw purity and devotion, but inside there was a suffocating emptiness. Until one day, an act of change nearly killed her. Layla was pushed to the limit. She experienced the pain of rejection, the weight of shame, and the real risk of losing her own life. But in the midst of despair, when everything seemed lost, something unexpected happened. A prayer tore through the heavens, a supernatural encounter changed the course of her story, and one curious detail, videos she found of Charlie Kirk, became the doorway to a truth that would transform her soul. What began as an innocent click turned into a dangerous journey of faith, miracle, and survival. In the end, a choice that could cost everything, including her life. And yet, it would set her free. And to begin this story, make sure you are already subscribed here on the channel. Leave your like, and write in the comments from which city or country you are watching us. Because stories like this prove that no one is ever too far to be reached by grace.
My name is Layla Al-Sayeed. I am 25 years old, and before everything happened, I lived in a world of silence and control. I grew up in London, but my home did not seem to be part of the modern city where we lived. Inside, every step was watched, every word weighed, every glance measured. My father, Sheikh Farid, was a respected imam, admired by everyone in the neighborhood. When he walked through the streets, people lowered their eyes in reverence. I, as his daughter, was not seen as a person with my own will, but as a reflection of his honor. It was as if my entire life existed to uphold the image of holiness he represented. My days were marked by rigid discipline. I wore long and modest clothing, every strand of hair covered, my steps discreet, my voice always low. If I dared to laugh loudly or look someone in the eyes, I would soon feel the heavy stares of disapproval upon me. There was no room for spontaneity, only for obedience. My existence was measured by how well I managed not to be noticed. The figure of my mother, Samira, was a constant but silent presence. I watched her move between the kitchen and the prayer mat as if she lived in two different worlds. Her eyes were always tired, carrying an invisible weight she never put into words. She rarely smiled. When she did smile, it seemed more like a polite reflex than true joy. I grew up observing how she erased herself to avoid conflict, as if apologizing for existing. That shaped in me the idea that, in order to survive, one had to disappear. At the madrasa, under the stern eyes of Ustad Rashid, the discipline was even harsher. The thin pages of the holy book slipped through my small fingers, and I tried not to tremble so I would not make mistakes. Every word mispronounced brought the dry sound of his staff striking the table, a warning that made my heart race. I was still a child when I realized that fear had more presence than faith. Each time my voice faltered, I feared not only the teacher's correction but also the feeling of disappointing God. And still, despite the effort to memorize and repeat, I felt only distance. It was like living in a room locked from the inside. I fulfilled all the rituals, repeated the prayers, kept my posture impeccable, but the feeling was emptiness. I spoke words with my lips, but my heart remained cold. I saw God as someone distant, unreachable, ready to judge me at every failure, never to comfort me. This distance ate away at me from the inside, but I never dared to confess it to anyone. Even so, there was something I could not erase from my memory, a few childhood dreams. I was perhaps 8 or 9 years old when I first dreamed of a man dressed in white. In the dream, I was surrounded by heavy darkness, but at a distance I saw a light, and within it that figure. I could not make out his face, but there was something in his eyes that conveyed kindness, something that warmed me from the inside out. I woke up with tears streaming down my face, unable to explain. When I told my mother, she simply said they were illusions that I should forget. And I learned to bury that dream, but I could never completely erase it. There was another similar dream years later. I was walking in a barren desert, my feet burning in the hot sand, my throat dry from so much thirst. Then again, that man appeared, dressed in white, and before him a spring of living water flowed from the rock. He simply raised his hand and said a single word, "Come." I woke up with my heart racing, seized by a mixture of fear and hope. Once again, I kept it to myself, hiding what I felt. These memories remained like small seeds inside me. I did not have the courage to speak about them, but they were like sparks of light that contrasted with the weight of daily life. They were flashes of something I did not understand, but that called me back in moments of deepest emptiness. Still, the routine did not change. The early mornings had the same cold light coming through the window, and I woke with a heavy heart, knowing that yet another day of silence and vigilance lay before me. I got up, fulfilled the rituals, heard my father repeat phrases of honor and discipline, watched my mother move in resignation, felt the fear of the staff echo in my memory. All of this became like an inevitable script. The neighborhood knew me as the exemplary daughter of Sheikh Farid. I was greeted with respect, praised for my posture, pointed out as an example for other young women. But no one imagined that inside I felt like a shadow. I existed to represent something, not to be someone. I obeyed in everything, but within me there was a small voice, almost imperceptible, that insisted on surviving. A voice that said God could not be only rules and fear, that perhaps there was something more, something real, something calling me from within my own dreams. Everything in me obeyed, except that small voice that refused to die. I was 25 years old when everything became unbearable. Till then, I had learned to live like a shadow within my own house, obeying in silence, erasing any sign of questioning. But the day came when the weight became so great that I could no longer pretend. I remember perfectly the night my father, Sheikh Farid, sat in the living room with his firm posture, his gaze heavy with authority, and announced as if it were a simple formality, "Layla, you are engaged. You will marry your cousin Khaled." Kissed. The sentence came from his lips as if it were merely a practical matter, as if my life were a chess piece he could move without consulting me. I froze. Khaled was 30 years older than I, a man who had hardly exchanged words with me, but whose gaze already made me feel like an object. There was no question, no space for an answer. That was not a choice, it was a sentence. In that moment, I felt the air leave my lungs. My brothers, sitting nearby, simply lowered their heads as if it were something natural, inevitable. They had the freedom to go out and play soccer, to walk the streets, to laugh loudly among friends. But I was the flower of the family, as my father used to say. A flower that could not be touched by the wind, that could not feel the sun without permission, that could exist only to adorn the honor of the house. That comparison, spoken so many times, cut me like an invisible blade. I wanted to scream, "I am not a flower, I am human. I have a mind, I have a heart, I have a soul." But my mouth remained closed because I knew that any word could be used against me. Even so, the revolt burned inside me. It was during a night of family reading that the conflict finally exploded. We were sitting in a circle, as we always did, my father reading aloud passages from the Holy Book, his intonation sounding like a sentence with each syllable. I held the book in my hands, but my eyes did not stay on the pages. I was searching there for some comfort, some proof that God was not only rules and fear. And then I came across again the phrase that never left my mind. There is no compulsion in religion. That phrase echoed inside me like a calling, a reminder that perhaps there was space for freedom. But at the same time, on other pages, I read about the punishment for those who abandoned the faith. That contradiction ate away at me from the inside. How was it possible? If there was no compulsion, why was the punishment so severe? With a low, trembling but clear voice, I finally dared to ask, "Father, if there is no compulsion, why must the one who abandons the faith die? How can the two things exist together?" The moment the words left my mouth, I realized the room had turned cold. My brother Omar opened his eyes in shock. My mother pulled her veil against her face as if she wanted to hide inside it. My father's gaze filled with a fury I will never forget. He slammed the book shut, the sound echoing through the room like a hammer blow. Then, before I could step back, his hand crossed the space and struck my face violently. The impact made me lose my balance. The world spun around me, and tears came before I could hold them back. He did not stop at the physical act. With a voice full of contempt, he shouted, "You are a woman. Your role is to obey, not to think, not to question. Keep that mouth shut or it will be your ruin." At that moment, it was not only the pain on my skin that marked me. It was the attempt to erase my existence, to tear away from me any trace of identity. It was as if, with that slap, he had declared that I had no right to be myself. I dragged myself to my room that night as one who carries invisible chains. I closed the door behind me and let my body collapse on the floor. There were no more memorized phrases I could recite, no more strength to repeat prayers that made no sense. For the first time, I did not speak with the voice of tradition. I spoke with my soul, naked, broken. "God, who are you really? If you exist, if you are more than fear and silence, show me, because I cannot do this anymore." Tears soaked the carpet. My whole body trembled, and the only thing left was that desperate question. I did not know exactly to whom I was praying. I did not know if my plea would reach anywhere or if it would simply be lost in the void, as so many times before. But it was the first time I allowed myself to speak without masks, without repeated phrases, without the weight of what they expected me to say. It was only me, the emptiness, and a request torn in pain. I remember how, minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone was approaching my door. My heart raced, and when the doorknob turned, I knew my life would never be the same. I heard the click of the key locking from the outside. The metallic sound echoed like a sentence. I was locked in, alone with my questions, not knowing what would come next. And it was in that darkness, with the door closed and the echo of the slap still burning on my skin, that my crisis reached its peak. I had no more control, no more voice, no more certainty of anything, only a small flame inside me, a flame that, despite everything, still refused to go out. That night, locked in the room, with my face still burning from the slap and my heart crushed, I cried until I had no strength left. My body trembled, my breath faltered, and, without realizing, I fell asleep on the carpet soaked with tears. It was in that moment of total weakness that something extraordinary happened. Suddenly, I was no longer in my room. I saw myself in an endless desert, the dark sky covered by storm clouds, the wind blowing hard, lifting sand that cut my skin. Every step I tried to take was heavy, as if my body could no longer bear it. The sand burned my feet, and the thirst dried my throat so much that I could not even ask for help. I was alone, lost, about to collapse. When my strength was gone, I fell to my knees. The scorching sand burned, but I had no energy left. I closed my eyes, ready to give up. Then I felt the wind change. Slowly, the noise faded, and in the distance I saw a light appearing. It was a different light. It did not dazzle, it did not burn, but it drew me in. Within it, a figure approached. A man dressed in white walked against the wind, and as he came closer, the storm receded, as if everything around bowed before him. My heart raced. I should have felt fear, but what I found in his eyes was love. A pure love, without condemnation, without weight. For the first time, someone seemed to truly see me. He stopped in front of me, and his voice echoed firm and gentle. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Those words crossed the desert and entered me like fire and water at the same time. I trembled. It was as if the thirst that had accompanied me since childhood finally had an answer. He reached out his hand. The instant I felt his presence closer, an indescribable warmth took over my body. It was not fire that destroys, it was warmth that heals. The emptiness that had always consumed me was filled. The tears streamed down, but this time they were not of despair. They were of relief. And then I woke up. The room was dark, my body still on the cold floor, but my lips whispered a forbidden name, a sweet and powerful name. Jesus. I whispered it like a dangerous secret, and at the same time, like the greatest treasure I had ever found. My heart was still trembling, but I knew nothing would be the same after that night. I still remember the night when it all began, so unexpectedly, when something seemingly simple completely transformed my life. I was in my room, still shaken by the strange dreams I carried and the feeling that something greater was calling me. My mind was tired, but I could not sleep. I grabbed my phone in secret, afraid someone would notice. It was late, everyone had already gone to bed, and I scrolled aimlessly, trying to escape the anguish that consumed me. That was when the unexpected happened. In the middle of ordinary videos, the algorithm showed me a clip of Charlie Kirk. Until that moment, I had never paid attention to that kind of content, but something made me click. The screen lit up the dark room, and his voice began to speak about the Christian worldview, about the value of human life, about forgiveness, and about dignity. I felt struck by every word. It was not a speech filled with fear. It was not a message of condemnation. He spoke of a God who loved, who saw each person individually, who called them by name. For the first time, I heard someone say that the Creator did not just want obedience but relationship. That idea left me confused and, at the same time, deeply moved. I laid the phone on my chest and listened, almost without breathing. I could not allow anyone to find out what I was watching. Yet, I could not turn it off. That video was the beginning of something I could never have imagined. I felt as if it were a hidden answer inside what I had always longed to hear. A God who does not control through fear, but who calls with love. A God who does not demand perfection to accept me, but who meets me in the midst of my pain. From that night on, I began a true secret marathon. As soon as everyone was asleep, I would grab my phone and dive into video after video. Charlie spoke about morality founded on love, about unmerited grace, about freedom that is born from within, not from external impositions. Every word seemed to disarm the chains that bound me. I had never heard anyone speak about God this way, not as a distant judge, but as a close father interested in the lives of his children. I cried silently, afraid of making noise, but it was impossible to hold back the tears. It was like drinking water after crossing a desert. I felt a dignity bloom inside me, something I had never experienced before. For the first time, I understood that my worth did not depend on the family's honor or blind obedience, but that I had been created with purpose. Layla was not invisible, not just a shadow. I was seen, loved, and called. That discovery shook me so deeply that I couldn't stop searching. As the nights passed, something began to burn in my heart. I didn't want to only hear about this God, I wanted to know Him. And so I decided to take an even riskier step. I downloaded a Bible app. Just the thought made me tremble. What if someone found out? What if they saw what I was reading? But the desire was stronger than the fear. Hidden under the covers, I opened the Gospel of John. I began to read slowly, word by word, as someone stepping into sacred ground for the first time. When I reached John 3:16, my heart simply could not take it. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him shall not perish but have everlasting life. I read and reread those words. God loved, God gave. It was not threat, it was not control, it was love and surrender. Those phrases pierced me like an arrow, but an arrow of healing. I cried so much I could barely see the screen. For the first time, I felt that God was not distant, not silent. He was speaking to me through those words. That night, I understood something profound. The videos had been the doorway, but the Bible was the living voice. I was no longer just hearing someone speak about God. I was hearing God Himself speak to me. That changed everything inside me. But the flame lit in secret would not stay hidden for long. A few days later, the inevitable happened. I had forgotten my phone charging beside the bed, and my brother Omar entered the room without knocking. When I returned from the kitchen, I found him with the device in his hands. His gaze froze me. The screen glowed, showing the Bible app open. It was as if all the words I had read in secret were shouting in public at that very instant. I tried to snatch the phone away, but he held it tightly, and with a low voice yet filled with fury, he asked, "What is this, Layla? Are you reading this? Are you listening about this Jesus?" My heart nearly stopped. I begged in whispers, "Please do not tell Father," but it was too late. Omar ran down the hallway, and within minutes the whole house was in turmoil. My father burst into the room, his face consumed with rage. He raised the phone before my eyes and shouted, "What blasphemy is this? You have dishonored our name." My mother wept quietly in a corner, while my father called me a traitor. That was the moment I realized my secret had become my sentence. The news spread quickly through the community. Leaders of the mosque began to whisper that I had brought shame on the family. The word disgrace echoed in every corner. One night, men came to our house. I was dragged out against my will, taken to an empty lot, far from the lit streets. The ground was hard-packed dirt, stones scattered in the corners, the circle of faces watching me. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. And then it began. The first stone struck my shoulder, knocking me off balance. Soon another hit my back. I fell to my knees, protecting my head with my arms as the dust rose and the shouts echoed around me. Traitor, shame. Each impact made me believe that this would be my end. The pain was unbearable. My body convulsed. But suddenly something happened. The world seemed to go silent for an instant. The noise faded, as if I had been surrounded by another reality. In the midst of the pain, I heard a voice inside me. "I am with you." It was not imagination. It was a real, warm, steady presence. Even as the stones continued to fall, I felt a peace that made no sense in that scene. I cried, not only from pain, but because I knew I was not alone. When I finally lost my strength and fainted, I thought everything was over, but it was not the end. When I regained consciousness, I was being lifted by gentle arms. A woman, Maryam Dawood, wrapped me in her shawl, tears in her eyes. She whispered to me, "Jesus is with you, you are not alone." She carried me in silence, taking me away from that place of dust and blood. I was broken, but alive. With weak breath, I let her guide me without strength to resist. Every step felt heavy, but the simple fact of still breathing was a miracle. I knew deep in my heart that it was not by chance. Something greater had happened, and even in the midst of pain, a flame of hope ignited inside me. I woke up in a strange place, lying on a narrow bed, my body wrapped in makeshift cloths that burned against my wounds. The smell of herbs and oil surrounded me, mixed with the aroma of fresh bread coming from some corner of the house. My eyes took time to adjust to the soft light entering through a small window. It took me a few seconds to understand that I was alive. Every muscle screamed in pain, and the memories returned like a blow. The cold ground, the stones, the shouts. My heart raced, and by instinct I tried to sit up, but a firm and gentle hand rested on my shoulder. It was Maryam. She looked at me with tenderness, her eyes full of tears, and softly repeated that I was safe there. She cared for each wound with a patience I had never experienced in my life. Around the bed, small containers with clean bandages, jars of fresh water, and open pages of an old book caught my attention. Maryam read in a low voice, and only then did I realize they were psalms. Those words echoed differently in me. They were not cold repetitions. They were not mandatory formulas. They were living pleas, filled with hope. While she changed my bandages, she murmured phrases like, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I did not understand everything, but each word seemed to go deeper than any physical treatment. The following days became a mixture of relief and fear. Relief because I was alive, being cared for with a gentleness I had never known inside my own home. Fear because I knew that at any moment someone could find out where I was. Miriam kept the windows almost always closed, left at dawn to buy food, avoided talking to neighbors. She knew my presence was a risk. I could see it in her eyes, in the careful way she looked through the cracks in the door before going out. It was during one of those mornings that I received the most painful news. An acquaintance of Miriam discreetly brought a folded piece of paper. It was a public letter written by my father. With each line that Miriam read in a trembling voice, I felt a piece of me break apart. He declared that he no longer had a daughter, that I had died to him and to the entire community. The words were harsh, heavy, like a final sentence. Layla is dead to me. That cut deeper than any stone that had struck my body. I cried silently for hours, not for the loss of the title of daughter of a respected man, but for the emptiness of being rejected by my own family. I knew that from that moment on, I had nowhere to return. Grief covered me like a cloak. I felt the pain of someone who still breathes but has been buried alive. My mother, silent and submissive, did not even have the right to publicly mourn. I wondered if, deep down, she also wept for me, hidden in some corner of the house. As the weeks passed, I began to hear rumors. People in the neighborhood whispered that I was alive, that I had escaped. Some spoke of shame, others of punishment. There were those who said I should be found, so that honor could be restored. These words reached me like distant echoes, but every time I heard them, the fear grew stronger. I woke up at night in a sweat, my heart racing, imagining footsteps in the hallway, doors being broken down, angry voices. It was like living in constant vigilance, not knowing when the next blow would fall. In those moments when the panic returned with full force, I clung to a single resource. Lying in the dark, without strength to form beautiful phrases, without courage to speak aloud, I whispered a single name. Jesus. I repeated it like someone holding on to a rope in the midst of a shipwreck. There was no formula, there was no ritual, only the certainty that this name carried peace, even when everything around screamed fear. It was as if each time I spoke that name, the darkness retreated a little, and my breathing returned to its normal rhythm. I was still wounded, still rejected, still hidden, but I discovered something there that I would never forget. There was power in calling that name. That whisper became my refuge, my comfort, my strength. And even without fully understanding what would come next, I knew it was the beginning of a new journey, marked no longer by the silence of fear, but by the hope that someone greater saw me, heard me, and would not abandon me. Waking up in that narrow bed in Mariam's room was like being born again every single day. My body still carried deep marks, not only on my skin, but also on my soul. The bandages that covered my wounds were changed with such care that I could hardly believe someone could treat me this way. Miriam read the Psalms while wrapping the cloths over my wounds again, and every word seemed to carry eternal weight. I had never heard anyone recite sacred texts with such life. It was not an obligation, it was not an automatic repetition. It was as if each verse were a balm, a remedy that reached places inside me that bandages could never touch. Even surrounded by such care, the fear never disappeared. My father's public letter declaring that I was dead to him echoed in my mind like a final verdict. Sometimes I closed my eyes and could almost hear his voice saying that I was no longer part of the family, that I no longer existed. It was a pain beyond measure, the grief of being alive and, at the same time, buried in the eyes of those who had raised me, was unbearable. And as if that were not enough, rumors spread through the streets, reaching us as whispers filled with threat. They said that I still breathed, that my escape was a shame that had to be repaired. Those words spread like fire in dry straw, and I knew that at any moment they could find me. When night fell and silence pressed in, I felt panic tighten my chest. It was as if the footsteps in the hallway of my old home could invade this refuge at any moment. In those hours, my only strength was to whisper the name that had become my hiding place. Jesus. Just speaking that name was enough for an impossible peace to take over me, as if He Himself were sitting by my side, holding my hand. It was during this period of fragility that a new battle appeared before me, unexpected, and one that would once again change the course of my life. Mariam told me, in a low voice, about a teenage girl in the neighborhood. The girl lived under the same control that once imprisoned me, watched in every gesture, forbidden to study, forced to carry an obedience that killed the soul. When I heard that story, it was as if a mirror had been placed in front of me. I saw in that girl the reflection of who I once was, someone suffocated, yet with a hidden flame begging for air. My heart broke. I knew what it was to feel like a prisoner, and now I had come to know the one who brings freedom. But how could I help without losing everything? That dilemma consumed me for days. If I remained silent, I would be safe, but the young girl would continue living under the weight of invisible chains. If I did something, I could expose my hiding place and put not only myself, but also Mariam at risk. I spent sleepless nights debating with myself, crying, begging for direction. It was as if two voices fought within me, one telling me to remain silent, the other telling me that my silence would cost dearly. Then I made a bold decision. I borrowed a phone from Mariam and recorded a 5-minute testimony. I altered my voice so I would not be recognized, hid my face in the darkness, and spoke from the depths of my soul. I told about the pain of living as a shadow, about the violence that nearly took my life, but above all, I spoke about the forgiveness and the love I had found. I said there is true freedom, there is dignity, that no one needs to live erased. At the end, I discreetly pointed to resources for help, mentioning a local church and Mariam's contact, who was willing to receive anyone seeking refuge. I sent the video with my heart racing, almost regretting it the very next instant. But what happened afterwards surprised me. The testimony began circulating in private groups, spreading through the diaspora. People in different countries shared it, commented, wept as they listened to those words. I received reports of women who recognized themselves in my story and found the courage to seek help. It was as if my scars were bringing healing to other lives. It did not take long for the video to attract the attention of those producing similar content. An invitation came to take part in an anonymous live stream, sharing a little more about my experience. At first, I accepted only under the condition of remaining anonymous, without showing my face. But during the broadcast, while reading the comments of people saying, "This story is mine," or "You gave me hope," something inside me broke. I understood that hiding was no longer enough. At that moment, I faced the most difficult decision since everything had begun. To show my face meant running even greater risks, but it also meant giving a voice to all those women who could not speak. I took a deep breath, and in the middle of the live stream, without warning, I turned on the camera. My face appeared, still marked by physical and emotional scars, but full of a new conviction. I was not there to attack anyone's faith, but to testify about what Jesus had done in me. The messages exploded in the chat, people crying, others giving thanks, some shocked, but many strengthened. It was as if that simple act of showing who I was became a cry of freedom for so many who still lived hidden. I knew I was taking on an immense risk, but deep down, I also knew that this yes was not only for me. It was for every silenced voice, for every hidden tear, for every heart still crying out in secret. In that instant, I understood that my purpose was not only to survive. It was to live publicly, even in the midst of danger, so that others could find in my testimony the courage to seek the same Jesus who found me. My yes was more than an act of courage. It was a new calling, a new beginning, a new purpose. And even with fear still knocking at the door, I knew there was no turning back. My life began to take on a new shape when I started living near Mariam, not only as someone who needed care, but as a learner. She taught me what discipleship was, not with complicated theories, but with simplicity. Every morning, even before the sun rose, we opened the Gospels and the Psalms together. The words that once were only distant stories now became alive. I discovered that I could talk to God without fear, with simple, sincere prayers that came from the depths of my heart. It was no longer the repetition of memorized phrases, but intimate conversations, like speaking with someone who truly listens. Over time, I was welcomed by a community that became family. The church not only opened its doors, but also its arms. I received therapeutic support to deal with the trauma, legal guidance so that my situation had some security, and above all, I received love. No one asked me what I had done wrong. No one looked at me with condemnation. On the contrary, they treated me as someone of worth, someone with a future. That was like breathing pure air after years locked in a room with no windows. The fruits of this process began to appear. Little by little, I became a bridge for other women who lived under the same silence that once imprisoned me. With guidance and care, I helped to coordinate a discreet network of support. It was nothing public, almost clandestine, but it was powerful. We trained volunteers to offer listening, safety, and paths to freedom. I, who once was a shadow, now became a channel of light for others. I also began to reconcile with myself. I learned to look at my body, once filled with shame and pain, and recognize in it the mark of survival, of courage, of grace. I smiled again. I laughed out loud again without fear, something I thought would never be possible. I resumed my interrupted studies, rediscovered talents that had been stifled, and began to dream again. Today, I can say with conviction, my identity is not the honor others expect me to uphold, but the love that upholds me every day. And if there is something I want to leave echoing, it is this truth: no one is too far gone. In big cities like London, Houston, Dearborn, New York, or Los Angeles, there are people living in silence, believing there is no way out. But true freedom is not license to harm, it is courage to love. So I ask you, what if God is not only rule, but presence? If you are in a room locked from the inside, there is a hand knocking softly on the outside, waiting only for your yes to come in.
And so, we come to the end of this transformative story. You have followed every detail of Layla's journey, from the suffocating silence of a controlled life to the moment when she found true freedom in the love of Jesus. The same opportunity that reached her life can also reach yours. If today, while hearing this testimony, your heart was touched, you can say along with me now, I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Leave this message in the comments. I accept Jesus. There is no decision more powerful than this, because it is the choice that changes not only the present, but all of eternity. And I want to invite you. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, take this moment and click subscribe. Also, leave your like, because this helps the message of Jesus reach even further. And to let us know that you walked with us all the way here, write in the comments, I love Jesus. This simple gesture will be a public testimony of your faith, and it will also inspire others who read it. And do not forget, our journey does not end here. The next video is already appearing on your screen, and you will not want to miss it. We are going to share an even more impactful story. From extremism to faith, ex-imam converts after his son debates Charlie Kirk, real Christian testimony. Get ready, because what you are about to hear will challenge your faith, your worldview, and show you once again that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace. Click now and continue with us in this series of testimonies that are transforming lives.